Obedience to Yahweh is not merely about following rules. It is a relationship of trust, surrender, and alignment with His will. Scripture shows us that Yahweh desires to do a transformative work within His people, shaping them into vessels for His glory. However, this work is not automatic. It requires our cooperation. True obedience is a yielded vessel or a yielded heart, willing to be led, corrected, and refined. When we obey, we open the door for Yahweh to fully complete the good work He began in us, molding us into the image of His Son and equipping us for His purpose. I'm Dr. Ray, and welcome to this week's Hosea International Speaks. Let's recall the division of Genesis that was introduced back in chapter 37. It is the ninth division that is called Vayeshev, and it means to dwell, remain, sit, or abide. You might want to go back to that chapter 37 and review it so that you could get a fuller understanding of the word. Jacob had to return to dwell in the land that Yahweh had given to Abraham after living 20 years with his uncle Laban, his mother's brother, and he has finally come to a place he can now call his own. We can say that he came back to take up residency, and now at this point he is reeling from the news that Joseph, his most beloved son, had been mauled by a lion. That memory would stay with him for years to come. At this point in Genesis chapter 39, Joseph has been taken down into Egypt, and he would come to live there for the rest of his life, or for the remainder of his life, in a foreign country. He would never return to Canaan except to bury his father in the cave that was purchased by his great-grandfather Abraham. Joseph would come to his Vayeshev. He would come to dwell permanently in a place not his own. Joseph's name means Jehovah has added, and that name would come to fruition in his life. But it came to mean a lot to Jacob because of Rachel's barrenness. A little insight into the meaning of Joseph's name tells us more than what Jacob saw, that Yahweh had in store the saving of a nation. The picture that is painted here, that we can see here, is that there is the turning of the mouth on the rim or the lip of a cup or a bowl which circles around it. The bowl was used for gathering things together and for eating. So with the definition to that extent, one could see with 20/20 vision and see that Yahweh was preparing his man that would not only save a nation, but would also feed them. Let's ask the question: is Yahweh preparing you for a special work that you don't even know of right now? Are you going through things that seem strange to you? You may want to take this time and ask, Yahweh, what is it that you're trying to tell me or trying to show me? Can you give me just a little hint? Can you enlighten me in any way? Maybe a word. Now, if you live like you don't care, then whatever's happening to you is being brought onto you by your own doing. Joseph would be tested in his new environment. This would be his second training ground for what was to come. His first testing ground or training ground was when he had the dreams that would give him insight into what he would be doing the rest of his life, which he did not discern at the moment. The second testing ground would be in a land outside of Canaan. The remainder of Genesis from chapter 39 on, for the most part, will take us to Egypt, where Joseph would spend the remainder of his life. There would be glimpses of Canaan when it comes to Jacob dispatching his 10 sons to Egypt in order to save his family from starvation. A good place in Scripture to examine of what transpired in the life of Joseph can be found in Psalms 105, verses 17 through 22. Let's give a note here. What can be said of all actions is that hindsight is 2020. Let's look at the scripture of this, of the portion of scripture which is just mentioned, Psalm 105, 17 through 22. And he, that's Yahweh, sent the man before them, the man Joseph, them Israel. Joseph was sold for as a servant, whose foot they hurt with fetters. That means he was laid in chains. And he was laid in iron until the time that his, Yahweh's word, came to pass. The word of the Lord had tested him, had tested Joseph. What word? The word of Yahweh. The king sent and loosed him, and the ruler of the people let him go free. He made him lord of his house and ruler of all substance. I don't think Joseph saw that in the dream. To bend his princes at his pleasure and teach his elders wisdom. If we're going to understand what happened here, we need to know who's who. This portion of scripture talks about Yahweh, knowing what he must do in order to save his people. And Joseph would be that man he would use. He would be that instrument, that conduit pipe, that vessel for this time. This portion of scripture will set the picture for the rest of the story, as they say. But at first, Yahweh must get his man down into Egypt in order to save a nation. But he, Yahweh, is also setting up for what must happen after 400 years, and then what must be done in order to cleanse a land filled with Baal worship, administered and ruled by the prince of the power of the air, Satan. Yahweh is preparing to take him down. Are you, pastor? Are you, minister? Are you leaders in that same position? You may want to investigate these scriptures a little more in depth when it comes to winning your sphere of influence. This does not have to do with just pastors only when it comes to winning your city. You could be dealing with areas of whether in business, arts and entertainment, the government, education, all these other areas. Are you in one of those? And you say, I'm not going to be able to do any good in there. Yes, you can. What you must do is ask Yahweh, what must I do to gain the area that I am in? You need to begin to understand heavenly tactics. Understand the scriptures. They have a lot to say when it comes to spiritual warfare and spiritual wisdom. Let's look at just the first phrase for the rest of this session. He sent a man before them. The phrase he sent is the Hebrew word shalah. It means to cast out, to send forth, to shoot forth. The picture that is painted for us is one that has been sent as a projectile to a certain place. In Joseph's instance, he was discharged as a projectile with an assignment that he would not fully be aware of until almost 20 years later. Before we continue with today's narrative, are you finding yourself in that same scenario that Joseph finds himself in? Maybe, just maybe, Yahweh has a word for you. Just a simple word. Well, let me give it to you. Let me say, says Yahweh, let my work be completed in you, and then you'll be ready to fulfill your calling. That's simple. You could even speak that over your own life. Well, I'm going to leave it there for right now, and we will pick up from here next week with the remainder of that verse. Well, I hope you enjoyed this week's lesson. If you did, go ahead and hit the like button. Probably right about there. And if you have not subscribed, now would be a good time. And then also, why don't you share this with a friend, with a family? Maybe there is somebody you know that might be going through some questions in their mind. Oh, what am I doing for the Lord? Go ahead and tell them. Go ahead and watch this, and maybe they can just begin to read the scripture, just the ones that I brought online today. Oh, and then you can also write to me at any one of the two email addresses. Or maybe you have some questions or just needing prayer in any situation. You can write me at hoseainternational@yahoo.com or hoseaintspeaks@gmail.com. And you can also give just by scanning one of the two QR codes there on your screen. Well, I hope you enjoyed this week's, and so I'm Dr. Ray, and I will see you next week on Hosea International Speaks.